In the middle of a live moment, Karoline Leavitt muttered, "Stupid black monkey," under her breath. She didn't know her mic was on. But what Jasmine Crockett said in response, it left the entire room speechless. And America, watching. The lights inside Studio 6A were polished to perfection, every surface gleaming under the weight of expectation. A familiar intro played over the speakers, bright, upbeat, forgettable. The kind networks use to make serious things seem palatable. The chyron read, "A national conversation on education reform." But no one tuned in for the policy. They tuned in for the players. On one side of the wide, curved desk sat Karoline Leavitt, blonde, buttoned up, perfectly poised. Her resume read like a ladder someone else had already climbed for her. Former press secretary, rising star, contender. She adjusted her mic and flashed a practiced smile to the camera. She'd been here before. She knew the rules, or so she thought. Opposite her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, hair slicked back, navy blazer sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't fidget, didn't adjust. She just sat there, calm and still, like someone who'd already run the math and knew how this would play out. Her face unreadable, her presence undeniable. The moderator's lick suit, mid-tier charisma, welcomed the viewers, doing the usual dance. A quick summary of rising school costs, teacher shortages, declining test scores. All important, all routine. The real story wasn't in the bullet points, it was in the body language. The desk between them looked wide, but it wasn't wide enough to hold what was simmering. They called it a discussion, framed it as civil dialogue between passionate voices. But no one believed that. Not really. The stage wasn't built for consensus. It was built for collision. When Jasmine and Karoline shook hands at the start, it was brief. No lingering, no leaning in, just two professionals, two adversaries, two women used to being underestimated for very different reasons. The camera panned back slowly, framing the shot. The audience leaned forward, sensing what the host didn't. This wasn't just policy. It was posture. It was politics wrapped in poise, war under the guise of words. And somewhere beneath the bright lights and teleprompters, the air began to thicken. Something was about to crack. But first, there would be quiet. It started like any other segment, too polished, too polite. Karoline leaned forward with the kind of smile that says, "I'm not threatened, just amused." She tossed out her talking points like darts dipped in sugar, statistics about failing districts, the need for returning to basics, how we've gotten too distracted by identity politics. The moderator nodded. Jasmine didn't. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, fingers still, eyes trained not on the camera, but on Karoline. Watching. Waiting. When she did speak, it was brief, measured. She referenced funding disparities, teacher burnout, the gap between legislation and lived experience. Her voice was smooth, low, not performative, just precise. The kind that doesn't need to climb in volume to carry weight. Karoline nodded along like she was being generous. But something in her eyes betrayed it. Not respect. Not curiosity. Something closer to irritation. A few more minutes passed. The moderator asked about charter schools, about federal oversight. Karoline launched into a well-rehearsed spiel about parental rights and woke curriculum. The audience chuckled politely. Jasmine tilted her head just slightly. Not enough to seem confrontational. Just enough to clock the game. Karoline kept going. You could feel the shift. A sharper tone. A stray smirk. The kind of glint that always precedes a line someone thinks will land. Jasmine's face didn't move. But her stillness? It was loud. The kind of loud that makes people uncomfortable. Because it doesn't flinch. It doesn't scramble to appease. It just waits. The moderator tried to keep the energy light. Asked Karoline about her media background. Tossed a joke her way. She laughed too hard. The audience followed out of habit, not humor. Jasmine didn't laugh. She wasn't here to charm. She was here to challenge. And you could tell Karoline was beginning to feel it. Not in her words, but in how quickly she returned to them. Rushing to reclaim authority in a room she didn't quite have command of anymore. There's a silence that comes before a storm. But this wasn't that. This was the silence that comes before a reckoning. Jasmine sat still. Karoline didn't realize she was already on the edge. And the drop was coming fast. It happened about 22 minutes into the segment. The smiles were still there, but they had stiffened. The moderator's voice had lost its luster, now flat, slightly rushed, trying to keep the pace from tipping over the edge. Karoline was mid-rant, something about accountability metrics, about how the federal government shouldn't coddle failure. Jasmine had just finished pointing out the funding disparity between predominantly white suburban districts and inner-city school show. Entire zip codes determined opportunity. She hadn't raised her voice. Hadn't interrupted. She had simply stated a fact. That's what did it. Karoline shifted in her seat, pressed her manicured hand against the desk, and gave a tight smile, one of those too perfect smiles that comes just before a rhetorical slap. The kind designed to wound without leaving fingerprints. Well, she said, tilting her head ever so slightly, maybe if we focused less on race and more on results, we wouldn't be in this mess. The word race hit the table like a dropped glass. It was said lightly, casually, as if it were just a misplaced file in a drawer, not the thread woven through generations of educational inequity. The host blinked. Hard. He shifted in his chair, one leg bouncing under the desk. Someone in the studio audience coughed. Another muttered a quiet, "Whoa." Karoline didn't notice. Or maybe she did and didn't care. Her gaze stayed fixed on Jasmine, like she was daring her to flinch, like she expected her to erupt, because that's what they always expected. The angry black woman, the emotional outburst, the gotcha moment that could be clipped and spun before the next commercial break. But Jasmine didn't take the bait. She didn't reach for her mic. Didn't straighten her back. She just stared. And in that stillness cool, unshaken the room began to shift. Not loudly, not all at once, but like a current turning under the surface. Karoline looked smug, victorious even. The host leaned forward, lips parting, clearly about to jump in and smooth things over. But Jasmine beat him to it. Without raising her voice, without raising anything, except the stakes. Jasmine blinked once, then leaned forward slowly, deliberately. Her elbows met the table, her hands stayed folded, her voice didn't waver, didn't lift, it simply landed. You don't get to erase my experience just because it makes you uncomfortable. It wasn't a zinger, it wasn't rehearsed. It was colder than that. Sharper. Real. The air in the studio thinned. Someone in the control room probably missed their cue. The host's lips parted like he wanted to jump in, redirect, do something but no sound came out. The audience sat suspended, somewhere between shock and reverence. Karoline opened her mouth. Nothing. Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't blink again, just sat in the truth of what she said unapologetic, unmoved. And somehow that silence roared louder than any raised voice ever could. The sentence circled the room like a flame looking for oxygen. The host adjusted his papers. Unnecessary. His hands shook. Behind the camera, a producer mouthed, "Did she just say that?" The audio tech didn't touch the sliders. He didn't need to. Everything was already loud enough. Karoline looked down for the first time. Not to check notes, but because the weight of what had been said didn't allow her to meet the gaze across the table. Jasmine sat back, not in retreat, never that. It was the lean of someone who had already delivered the blow, already stepped over the line and left it behind. The moderator finally exhaled. It came out as a laugh, nervous and shallow. "Well, we've certainly touched a nerve," he said, smiling like the cameras could hide the unease cracking down his spine. But no one was smiling with him. No one clapped, no one chuckled, not even the warm-up audience trained to applaud on cue. The silence remained. Sacred. Tense. Real. Jasmine didn't follow it with another line. She didn't have to. That sentence was a full stop. A line in the sand. And everyone in that room, whether they admitted it or not, knew the story had just changed. Because some moments aren't about winning. They're about anchoring. And Jasmine? She had just dropped an anchor so deep, no one could pretend they hadn't felt the shift. Chapter 5. Karoline's Fatal Mistake. Karoline laughed. Not a full laugh. Not one born of confidence. It was shallow. Tight. The kind of laugh that slips out when the ground beneath you starts to shift and you're not sure whether to fight or flee. She looked at the moderator, then back at Jasmine. Tried to recover. Something about strong opinions and passion in politics. But no one was listening. Not really. The room was still stuck on Jasmine's sentence. Still sitting in the weight of it. Karoline could feel it too, even if she didn't show it. Her smile stretched thinner. Her eyes flicked toward the audience, then to the camera, then back down. And then she made the mistake. The fatal one. As the moderator turned to a follow-up question, Karoline leaned slightly to her left. Eyes low, voice lower, but not low enough. Maybe she is just a stupid black monkey. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Her mic caught them clean crisp, unmistakable, undeniable. Just 7 words, but each one etched in concrete the moment they left her mouth. There was no echo effect, no dramatic music, just air stale, unmoving. The host's eyes widened. He didn't say a word. Jasmine didn't look over. Not yet. She didn't have to. The audience didn't gasp. They froze. Everyone heard it. Everyone knew what they'd just heard. The producer behind the camera fumbled his headset. A stage assistant swore under her breath. Someone in the second row instinctively pulled out their phone. And Karoline? She didn't realize it. Not right away. She took a sip from her water bottle, blinked, composed herself like nothing had happened. Like the poison she'd just released hadn't already seeped into every inch of that room. But the moderator heard. Jasmine heard. And the mic live, recording, broadcasting heard. That was all it took. One sentence. One moment. A whisper she thought she could hide in the noise. But there was no noise anymore. Just truth, caught on tape. And outside the studio, the world was already listening. The segment hadn't even gone to commercial before the clip hit Twitter. Someone in the control room leaked it. Maybe a junior editor, maybe a disgusted tech. Didn't matter. It took seconds. The clip was raw, unpolished, uncut. Karoline's words barely louder than a breath, but clear as crystal. Maybe she is just a stupid black monkey. By the time the credits rolled, the internet was on fire. Within 10 minutes, it was everywhere. TikTok, Reddit, Instagram, YouTube. It didn't need a caption. It didn't need an opinion. The words spoke for themselves. Hashtags multiplied. Go back gate. Karoline caught. We heard it. Headlines erupted before midnight. Did Karoline Leavitt say what we think she said? Liv Mike picks up. Shocking comment from GOP figure. Jasmine Crockett's poise versus Karoline's prejudice. The reactions weren't mixed. They were volcanic. Political commentators hit record without scripts. Civil rights leaders issued statements within the hour. Even celebrities, some normally silent on politics, tweeted one word: unacceptable. But it wasn't just the usual voices. It was teachers in Akron, baristas in Tampa, truck drivers in Nevada pulling over to replay the audio just to be sure they heard what they heard. They had. There was no denying it. There was no misheard, no misquote, no noise interference. It was clear, and it was cruel. People weren't just angry, they were tired. Tired of coded language, tired of polite racism wrapped in smirks, tired of being told that maybe they'd misunderstood what they knew deep down was meant exactly as it sounded. Jasmine's name surged alongside Karoline's, but for very different reasons. One was trending for poison, the other for power. Clips of Jasmine's calm reply. You don't get to erase my experience, looped alongside Karoline's slur, like a side-by-side of dignity and decay. The contrast was cinematic. The stakes now national. And somewhere in a campaign office in D.C., a young staffer looked up from their phone, eyes wide. This, they whispered, is about to be war. When the segment returned from commercial, the air had changed. The host smiled too wide. His voice was too upbeat. The kind of nervous reset networks rely on when something's gone wrong and they're hoping no one noticed. But everyone noticed. The room wasn't the same. Karoline sat tight-lipped, spine straighter than before. Her smile gone, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken since the break. And Jasmine? Jasmine looked the same as before. No change in posture. No shift in tone. Just stillness anchored, present, unbothered. The host turned to her. Congresswoman, he began carefully. We want to acknowledge that a comment was made during the break that's now being discussed online. Do you have anything you'd like to say? Jasmine didn't rush. She nodded once, then leaned forward, not for show, not to perform, just to be heard. It's always women like me told to tone it down, she said, voice low and steady. To smile more, soften our words, soften ourselves, and all we're doing is telling the truth. The words didn't sting. They carved. Karoline shifted in her seat. The host said nothing. The studio fell quiet again, not the silence of discomfort, but the kind that happens when people realize they're not just watching a segment anymore. They're witnessing something else. Something heavier. Jasmine's gaze didn't leave the camera. We're labeled aggressive when we're direct, angry when we're clear, emotional when we're factual, and then someone says something like what we all just heard, and we're told not to overreact. No one looked away. Not now. Not after that. She didn't yell. She didn't call names. She didn't even call Karoline out directly. She just peeled back the mask hand, let the audience see what had always been there. Karoline tried to respond. She opened her mouth, closed it again, looked at the host. He wasn't saving her. Because Jasmine hadn't set a trap. She'd set a mirror. And now the whole country was staring into it. It didn't take hours. It took minutes. By the time the credits rolled, the internet was on fire for a second time, but this time the center wasn't Karoline's insult. It was Jasmine's response. The clip of her leaning into the mic, calm and unflinching, began spreading faster than the insult that triggered it. No shouting, no dramatics, just truth, sharpened and delivered with precision. TikToks exploded. Edits dropped by the second, some in black and white with dramatic piano, others overlaid with cinematic strings, and Jasmine's words echoing like a gospel. It's always women like me told to tone it down. Twitter flooded. Memes, GIFs, screenshots of Jasmine's face, mid-sentence calm, deadly accurate, circulated like wildfire. The hashtags surged. Crockett Clapback. Not going anywhere. Say it louder but make it quieter. A TikTok creator in Atlanta posted a side-by-side reaction video, whispering, "This is how you hold power without raising your voice." It crossed 2 million views by noon. Celebrities jumped in. Ava DuVernay retweeted the clip with the caption, "Grace, steel, precision." Kerry Washington posted, "She said what needed to be said and didn't blink once." Even journalists, many of them women of color, shared personal threads about their own workplace experiences, their own moments of being called spicy, hostile, or difficult. The quote became more than a sentence. It became a signal. A cultural shift disguised as a soundbite. Activists reposted it with campaign links. Students added it to their Instagram bios. One user posted a screenshot of Jasmine mid-response with the caption, "Not a moment, a masterclass." It wasn't just internet noise. It was resonance. Even the skeptical voices had to acknowledge it. Whatever you think of her politics, that was the cleanest takedown I've ever seen without raising a single octave. Karoline's name was still trending. But now, it wasn't just what she said that people were talking about. It was how thoroughly Jasmine dismantled it without ever swinging. And somewhere, deep in a comment thread, someone posted it plain. This is what power looks like when it knows it doesn't need to shout to be heard. Karoline's office lights were still on at midnight. Phones ringing. Emails stacking. Text bubbles popping up faster than anyone could reply. The team half assembled, fully panicked, sat scattered across couches and folding chairs in a conference room that now smelled like burnt coffee and sweat. Someone opened a window. It didn't help. The comms director, a man named Trent with polished shoes and thinning patience, paced the room. "She didn't mean it," Karoline said again, arms crossed, voice brittle. "That doesn't matter," Trent replied, not looking up. "It's already real." By 12:42 a.m., they had their first draft. A soft, shapeless thing dressed in corporate camouflage. My comments were misunderstood due to overlapping audio and unrelated background noise. I categorically reject all forms of racism. My record proves that. The email was sent. The post was uploaded. The backlash hit harder. Comments flooded the statement within seconds. "We heard you. What background noise, Karoline? Say you're racist without saying it. This isn't misunderstood. It's crystal clear." No one was buying it. Not even people from her own side. Conservative columnists called it a distraction. Moderate pundits called it a liability. And donors? They called her campaign manager, asking for assurances they couldn't give. By 1:15 a.m., the quote had made national headlines. It was everywhere. Talk radio, morning news previews, TikTok scrolls, Reddit threads. Even apolitical circles started chiming in group chats with moms, coworkers, cousins. The spin machine was breaking. No amount of PR tape could seal the leak. Because the truth had already slipped through. And Jasmine? She hadn't said a word since. That silence was louder than anything Karoline's camp could draft. Jasmine's phone buzzed nonstop. Producers, journalists, lawmakers, former classmates, strangers. Everyone wanted a quote, a response, a follow-up, something sharp, something viral. She gave them nothing. For 24 hours, she vanished. No tweets. No press. No live video. No cryptic, stay tuned messages. Just stillness. She went offline fully, intentionally tucking herself into the quiet-like armor. Not to hide, to hold space. The world raged for her. Editorials poured in. Cable panels debated every word she hadn't said yet. Not going anywhere stayed trending. People dissected her calm like it was a strategy manual. Because it was. She knew what they wanted: a fiery retort, a viral clapback, something to feed the algorithm. But Jasmine wasn't interested in being a spectacle. She was shaping something else. The silence became part of the story. Every hour she stayed quiet. The contrast deepened. Karoline flailed, scrambling to patch the rupture. Jasmine, she did nothing, and somehow it hit harder. In the quiet, people saw the weight of restraint. How much power it takes not to swing. How much discipline it takes to choose grace when anger would be easier. In the stillness, Jasmine's presence expanded. Her name became shorthand. Her quote, "You don't get to erase my experience," wasn't just a sentence anymore. It was stitched into culture, into classrooms, into dinner table conversations. And still she said nothing. Because she didn't need to. The damage wasn't hers. The mess wasn't hers to clean up. Sometimes power isn't loud. Sometimes it's the decision to let the truth echo, uninterrupted. In Jasmine Newvery moment, she stayed silent. The world listened harder. There was no stage. No flags flanking her on either side. Just a single podium. No music, no lights, no fanfare. At exactly 10:00 a.m., Jasmine Crockett stepped out from a quiet hallway and into a press room packed tighter than it had ever been. Not just reporters, not just aides, observers. Interns. People who didn't need to be there but showed up because they felt something happening and wanted to witness it for themselves. She wore black, no notes in hand, just a leather folder tucked under her arm. She placed it on the podium. Opened it once. Closed it again. "I was going to read something prepared," she said, steady and unfazed, "but I don't think I need to." No teleprompter, no spin. Just her voice. And the silence wrapped around it like a wire. "What happened 2 nights ago wasn't new to me," she began. "It wasn't surprising. It wasn't even original." A few cameras clicked. She didn't pause. "I've been told Black Monkey more times than I can count. Sometimes with a laugh, sometimes with a whisper, sometimes in rooms just like this one. No yelling, no outrage, just truth. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm not here to play victim. I'm here to remind people, especially the ones watching who've been told the same thing, that belonging doesn't need permission." That line hit like a bell. It rang and kept ringing long after she moved on. "I'm not being loud," she added, leaning in. "I'm being clear." A few reporters looked down like eye contact would be too much. Others nodded without realizing. "We cannot keep pretending that this kind of language is accidental. It's not a slip, it's a symptom, and I refuse to absorb the blame for someone else's discomfort." She didn't cry. She didn't crack. She closed the folder and stepped back. No questions taken. No handshakes extended. Just a quiet exit through the same door she entered. And in that stillness, the story changed. It wasn't a clapback anymore. It was a statement of record. And America felt it. It started in classrooms. A fourth-period civics teacher in Detroit paused her lesson and played the clip. "Belonging doesn't need your permission." Silence followed. Then questions. Then stories, students sharing moments they hadn't talked about before. Microaggressions, mockery, disbelief. In a middle school library in Baltimore, a laminated copy of Jasmine's quote went up on the wall next to Sojourner Truth and Shirley Chisholm. At a PTA meeting in Oakland, a parent read her speech aloud, then said, "I want my daughter to grow up with that kind of composure." Across social media, the clip replayed in every corner of the digital world. College pages, book clubs, dad forums, Reddit threads titled, This is how you do it." A high schooler in Tulsa posted, "I played her speech for my mom. We both cried." A barista in Philly uploaded a TikTok, Jasmine's voice playing over footage of her being ignored during a staff meeting. Caption, "I'm not being loud, I'm being clear." It resonated deeper than politics. It hit where people live. Even those who didn't align with her policies started to speak up. A retired Navy vet posted on Facebook, "I didn't vote for her, but I respect the hell out of her composure. That woman is iron." A Republican school board member in Nebraska retweeted the clip and added, "This isn't about partisanship, it's about presence." Talk shows dissected every sentence. Late-night hosts quoted her without punchlines. Cable pundits scrambled to respond. Some praised her, some twisted her, all of them amplified her. She didn't respond to any of it. She didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, a single sentence had cut across noise and left something behind. Not just applause. Not just anger. Respect. From people who didn't agree with her. From people who'd never heard of her. From people who saw themselves in her even if just for a moment. This wasn't about a viral moment anymore. This was the cultural shift that happens when someone doesn't just hold the mic. They hold the mirror. Behind the scenes, the collapse wasn't loud. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles after too many texts go unanswered, after inboxes fill with phrases like, respectfully withdrawing support. Karoline Leavitt sat in the corner of her campaign office, surrounded by legal pads no one was writing on, and a whiteboard full of plans that suddenly meant nothing. A week ago, they'd been charting her 2026 run. Now they were scrubbing her calendar. Event invitations disappeared. Donor calls stopped being returned. One major backer pulled a planned fundraiser and issued a public statement. "We believe in accountability." It wasn't anger. It was abandonment. Even the news networks that once lined up for sound bites now labeled her problematic, a liability. And Karoline? She wasn't fighting back. Not anymore. Her once starched voice had gone soft in interviews. When she gave them at all, she still hadn't looked Jasmine in the eye since the segment. Still hadn't said her name. She blamed fatigue, stress, unfair editing, the mic. But her team wasn't buying it. Neither was anyone else. Trent, the comms director who once swore she was media gold, now sat across from her with a single sentence. "You need to disappear, now." Karoline didn't argue. She just nodded, numb. A canceled radio hit. A dropped speaking engagement. 3 press requests declined in 24 hours. She stayed off camera. Stayed off message. She was no longer controlling the narrative. She was surviving it. And when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see fire or defiance anymore. She saw fallout. Because once the mask slips and the mic stays on, you can't just reset the script. Not when the country already heard you. While Karoline faded from view, Jasmine surged forward, not louder, just farther. She didn't chase headlines. They followed her. But her steps were grounded, methodical. She spoke at community colleges in San Antonio and Charlotte. She sat with high schoolers in East Cleveland who had turned her speech into a classroom mural. She launched a mentorship initiative for young Black women considering public office. Not as a brand. As a blueprint. Cameras still showed up, but she didn't perform for them. She wasn't selling a story. She was the story. And she used that momentum to push legislation federal funding to equalize teacher salaries across districts, a bill addressing school infrastructure decay in low-income communities. It wasn't flashy policy. It was the kind that took time. The kind she'd been fighting for before the mic, before the clip, before the moment. Now she had the platform to match the persistence. Karoline, meanwhile, was still spiraling. She canceled her next media tour. Avoided Capitol Hill photo ops. Took personal time. Her team rebranded her feed with soft focus filters and Bible verses. Tried to soften the edge that was now cutting her instead of others. She told friends she was reflecting. But deep down, she was reckoning. Not with the backlash. With herself. The silence that had once been Jasmine's weapon now became Karoline's mirror. And what she saw was someone who had confused comfort with correctness. Power with immunity. Privilege with protection. The difference now? Everyone else saw it too. And Jasmine? She kept moving not to prove a point, but to build something bigger than one. Because while one woman was undoing the damage, the other was redefining the moment. And the path ahead looked nothing like the road behind. It could have ended with the segment. Just another viral moment in a culture that burns bright and fades fast. But it didn't. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just shut down a comment. She rewrote the conditions for what power looks like, especially when it's quiet. The clip still circulated, sure. Still got reposted with reaction emojis and slow-motion edits. But something deeper happened too. It became curriculum. A university ethics class in Chicago played her press conference alongside landmark civil rights speeches. A high school in Birmingham changed the theme of their student leadership week to clarity over volume. Even a corporate training module borrowed her quote, "I'm not being loud, I'm being clear." For a seminar on bias in workplace communication, it became more than a sentence. It became a standard. Jasmine never declared herself a symbol. She didn't need to. Others made her one not out of worship, but recognition. Because what she did wasn't just courageous. It was familiar. To the woman in HR told to smile more. To the young teacher called too intense in staff meetings. To the black girl who was never angry, just unheard. They saw themselves in her. But more than that, they saw what it looked like to stay planted while the ground shook. Jasmine kept working, kept speaking not louder, but wider. She mentored. She passed legislation. She showed up where the cameras weren't. And she never turned the moment into merch. Because this wasn't about brand. It was about blueprint. The moment didn't make her. She made the moment mean something. And long after the headlines turned, long after Karoline faded from the conversation, Jasmine's sentence stayed etched into the cultural consciousness. A reminder. Not a mic drop. Not a meme. A measure for what grace under pressure looks like. For how clarity can cut deeper than cruelty. And in her final interview on the Matter weeks after the segment, after the press conference, after the wave, Jasmine said it plain. This wasn't about a headline. It was about a reminder. You don't need to raise your voice to raise the standard. That's the legacy. Not the moment itself, but what it made possible for the next person who walks into the room, holds their ground, and refuses quietly, clearly not to shrink. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.